Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Goff, and I'm Principal Product Marketing here at Revenera, and I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, Building Software License Compliance Programs in a Cloud World. As always, I am very glad to be joined by my colleague, Vic DeMarines, who's VP of Product Management for Software Monetization here at Revenera, and he's going to share his years of insights and experience with us today. But before we get started, though, I would like to go through a few housekeeping details. First, today's discussion will be roughly half an hour long, and if you have any questions or comments along the way, please add them in the Q&A tab, and we will try to answer them as we go along or at the end if time allows. And of course, if we don't get to your questions, we will follow up with you individually after the event. Finally, please be sure to check out the related materials that we've provided in the handouts tab, and we'll also be sending you a link to the recording in the next 48 hours or so. So let's get started talking about today's topic. We're going to talk about some software piracy and license compliance trends that we're seeing. We'll go through that pretty quickly. We're going to talk about license compliance in cloud world, the reason why we're here. And then Vic's going to really dig into what you can do to expand your compliance programs beyond piracy, move into overuse, and then ways of digging deeper and leveraging additional types of data, specifically ISP data. So let's start with some trends. Unfortunately, the BSA hasn't updated its report in a while, but this one is probably familiar to most of you. It's a $46 billion problem, and that was as of the 2018 report. And of course, it's a study, and it's a good study, but the stats on the right really point to what the challenge for a lot of suppliers is suppliers really don't have a great way of understanding how much revenue that they're losing to piracy or overuse or misuse. These are numbers from last year's software compliance and piracy monetization monitor. We'll have a new one of those coming out in about a month or so, but I suspect the numbers will be roughly the same. It's really important to have that measurement capability to really understand, the impact on revenue leakage of piracy, overuse, and misuse. And of course, those companies that do have telemetry, like our compliance intelligence product, this is data that comes from that. And each year we update our top 20 list of software license misuse and piracy hotspots. Not a lot of big surprises here when you look at it. We do see, obviously China in the top spot, and then Russia, United States, and India filling out the top 4. Russia, obviously, these days, there's not a lot you can do there. But the good news is we are seeing a lot of customers of ours, software suppliers, who are actually having some pretty good luck in India and in China. We actually just had a user group for our compliance intelligence customers. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. But the good news is that those are regions where they are seeing some success now and continuing to improve there. So still a global problem, but again, the inclusion of the United States in that top 3, this is a market where there's a lot of good conversion opportunities, strong IP laws. You can take a very different approach. You don't have to be heavy-handed about it. You can take much more sort of sales approach. Take those leads that you're getting, reach out to them, and then convert those overusers or pirates to paying customers.
Michael, I think because the question comes up quite a bit with when you see United States top 3 and you see some countries that you would associate with higher rates of piracy, certainly from the BSA numbers like Italy or even India. It's such a big economic base in the United States. So although the rates are lower, you have a huge number of application use. We also have those things that we associate with the United States where the use might be in other places, but we're also, the organization is based in the United States. So outsourcing can kind of blend that rate as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. But the reason we're here today is really to talk about what license compliance looks like in a cloud world. And this is a theme that did come up in that user group as well, of what's going to be the impact of, SaaS, moving forward, and the interesting part was we had a customer panel. Nobody was really worried that, nobody agreed that SaaS is going to be a silver bullet to piracy. So we'll put it that way. And when you look at this, this sort of shows, that there's still a tremendous amount of on-prem software out there. Yes, there's a lot of SaaS out there too, but when you look at sort of the extensive use of these models of deployment, on-prem is certainly the highest, and obviously SaaS is growing. But we're talking about a hybrid world now, so this is also data from our monetization monitor report from last year. And we see, the growth of SaaS is really big. But 25% of folks still see on-prem as a growing model. So we're going to be living in this hybrid world for a while. And I think that's one of the reasons why our customer panel at that user group really was like, you know what, we don't see this going away. We don't see our jobs as being in jeopardy. Um, and they did see that there's a need for compliance organizations to continue to play a role, in understanding what's being used, and they look at it as an opportunity, and to take that compliance and advisor role to the rest of the organization, as a lot of folks are moving from on-prem to SaaS, to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean, just to comment on that, I think we're seeing an increased focus, right? Certainly a focus on how to leverage the cloud, but a lot of the customers that we work with who have on-premise, they have had years and years of versions of technology out in the field. They have, air-gapped environments, manufacturing, specialty software, computer-aided design and manufacturing. So that base lives for quite a while. And there might be cloud collaborative services built on top of that, but I think you can always have a footprint of your intellectual property that can be residing on premise. And with that, you have a concern of overuse and piracy.
Yep. And I know you're going to talk about this in a bit, Vic, but this notion of piracy as a service is a legitimate concern too. And a lot of our customers are seeing that as well. It's not just the traditional software suppliers who are taking advantage of cloud computing and the economies of scale and the power of the computing available there. We are seeing a lot more coming out of that. And I know you're going to talk about that. But with that, Vic, let me hand it off to you to sort of dig in a little bit deeper into what we're talking about today.
Yeah, and we took a look at this from, there's certainly some challenges in if you are a licensed compliant, if you have license compliance as an established, mature component of your business, there's some challenges with really the advent of cloud and the growth of cloud services. And then there's some opportunities. And especially when we talk about challenges, internally speaking, if you have strategic initiatives that require product impact, and you're going to have a challenge from a corporate and engineering focus, right? Because some of those resources are really focused on their SaaS or cloud initiatives. I think, thankfully, if I look at the opportunity as well, the counter to that is when we talk about telemetry or leveraging business intelligence to gather more data around the user base for compliance, these are easier things to integrate versus more enforcement, more complex licensing scenarios or models. So that's the good news around that. Now, growth of piracy service. I want to, a definition of term here. Certainly, it has an impact on content and streaming content. Where we've seen it, we've seen scenarios where organizations or groups have been able to stand up license servers, not necessarily in the Flexera or the Revenera world, but we've seen, license servers set up in a cloud format where they're in a private, anonymous organization, and clients can connect to that to get software for free, essentially. And then probably the rising trend that we see is leveraging, virtual private networking or cloud services to host software, and have almost like a virtual desktop interface, which then makes it a bigger challenge to try to identify or match those organizations with that type of service. Again, I wouldn't say predominantly the data's there, but there is a growth that's happening. And where else do we see this impacting is, well, if you remember cyber loggers, and that's always been there in the background, rapid share, nitro flare, thousands of sites that really monetize piracy by offering access to that software, and you pay for access just like a service provider. And we saw that was kind of a big news thing back in 2000, right? There was the advent of of these sites, and then there was a lot of legal activity to bring them back down. Well, in the cloud world, where the payment is becoming ubiquitous, where on the phone I can do a Google transaction to buy access to one of these sites. And yes, you can do a takedown strategy, but there's too many of them. We've seen the resurgence of these sites, and more importantly, how easily accessed they are. And I have a slide that talks about that. So something that we do monitor. We actually do for our customers. We do a lot of investigation of what's been available, and we just noticed that it's been easier and easier to access that software. And I would directly attribute that to the cloud. And of course, in the streaming world, right, when we're talking about the Netflix's HBO demand, all this content coming out, and with the advent of the cloud, it's becoming easier to stream, and this is a huge increase. So certainly, piracy is going to abound with that content. It is about is continuing with that. Not the same with software, obviously, but something to point out. So from an opportunity perspective, where are software publishers investing? Well, they're investing in the My Account feature, right? They're trying to connect to their end users. If they've been a channel organization, they're trying to, have a direct connection to those users. They're investing in identity management systems. They're bringing, new licensing and rights, monetization models to bear that will give them a better connection to the user. Well, that's going to help with license compliance, right? That's going to help identify, those what has been traditional overuse issues, or regional regions where you've had such high rates of piracy. Because you're going to have a better connection with the end user, you can hopefully block that from being more of a challenge than it has been. The other opportunity is if you have active usage data on overuse and piracy, if you have a telemetry based solution, you have an opportunity to leverage that from a business intelligence perspective to see, okay, if I start to offer more elastic licensing or subscription type models, can I reduce the friction that had caused piracy? For a lot of companies with higher value software, it has always been, if you had a use case where the end user wants temporary use of functionality, they had to go get the big suite of software. Well, if you can offer more elastic based licensing where I can access one piece of that product for a temporary period of time and charge for it, and you do that right within your application, that promises to help reduce compliance scenarios and piracy. Okay, well, we move to the next type of gun, driving. So let me drive. Okay. Oh, this is just, I just wanted to show this. This is just one of many, sites out there that allow access to pretty expensive software. And you'll just notice, and you notice if you look at this over time, it used to be you'd have the Bitcoins, these payment services you never heard of before. And now you see PayPal, and then sometimes you'll see Google and Samsung Pay up there. So legitimate payment services that allow you to safely acquire access to get software. And so I've seen a trend where this has become more apparent over time, and I directly attribute that to really the advent of cloud and access and ease of access. So let's talk about another opportunity, because as you start to build a connection with your end users, you start to invest in entitlement management. You go from spreadsheets to going from CRM to actually trying to manage your use rights in one system of record. You have an opportunity now. You have an opportunity to broaden what you look at from a business intelligence functionality, not to just focus on pure piracy, but where have you had an overuse issue? Where have you had gaps that you weren't able to report on before? And we'll talk about one use case, which is our own product at Revenera, InstallShield, where they had a node and user-based licensing, which is really specifically at risk for overuse, because as companies acquire, merge, work with others outside of their domains, you lose track of that internally. Even though they might have good asset management systems, it becomes hard to track, and you get out of compliance. And so we've noticed that specifically with those type of license models, and we have a good demonstration and case study around that with InstallShield. Other areas where you had paper-based agreements around geographic or domain-based enforcement, and again, that's going to be ripe for especially with the cloud, with how you virtually access data and where you host these machines that are running the software, it's going to increase the risk. The good news is a telemetry based approach can target that. They can target that use case and give you a definitive read on, okay, we're talking about software that's being used in one company, but it's now obviously spread throughout the world to other divisions that they hadn't licensed. So those are unique opportunities for overuse detection and growing your compliance program. And if you're going down that path, you want to think about what is the type of information you want to collect that would help you match that data with your backend, use rights or your entitlement systems. And normally, what we have, what we see as a common format is either a serial number or some sort of activation ID or a customer ID that might be not recognizable. It might be hashed or might be a unique identifier, but you can track that back to your system of record and understand what accounts are using that software. That becomes really critical. So if I can pick that up within the client software and then bring that back into a backend dashboard, and I look at that against the usage data, now you can build a more complete profile of the use of your software and identify those scenarios where you need to reach out and get those accounts properly licensed. And accessing entitlement data as well as other data sources, that's becoming more critical. And all of our customers, especially the ones that have been using our technology around compliance intelligence and they have mature programs, they're looking for ways to tap that data or merge that data with their own data lakes or data warehousing to get that 360 view. Because most of the time, users who are overusing software or pirating software have touched the website, have some connection to the organization, and with the the compliance program's focus is to try to identify that use by an organization, pulling in support, marketing, and entitlement data into what you can compare with your usage data is really key. And of course, the EULA is always part of this equation. You have to be transparent in what you're collecting. You have the legitimate right, certainly as a publisher, to track your software and prevent overuse. But you also have to disclose that, and that's a key requirement. And it's not just GDPR. There's certainly other regulations, regional regulations, where that's important. So let's move on a little bit. Let me talk about the case study with InstallShield, because I think it offers us into a window into a world where may be applicable to other products out there, and what the opportunity could be for really a mature on-premise product. So that InstallShield, the estimate is about 50,000 active customers, very mature market, a solution that is still used today to build on-premise applications or executables, and it's got wide horizontal use across a lot of industries. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, they used a named user model and a node lock model, and they knew that they had overuse, and they also saw that prior to investing in a compliance intelligence strategy, they could see the piracy out there, they could see the cracks, and they were doing trying to keep up with that. But from a solution perspective, when I first met with this team, they really gravitated to this because they were very focused on not adding more complexity to their product, making it easier to license, but getting visibility into this issue and having a way to reach out to those accounts. And they've taken a very soft approach from a license compliance. They are not doing hard legal enforcement. They are reaching out to accounts, identifying that overuse, and making sure that they match that with the appropriate license model, which normally leads to an increased revenue. And it's kind of interesting when we looked at this data from both an event perspective. So an event would be every session of the application and the unique machines. And you can see the green here is really reporting on all use, right? The licensed version. And then we have in the background the events being generated from Piracy. So, and on the right, you can see there's a lot more machines that are true piracy versus licensed overuse, which was kind of a surprise when we first realized that. And what this tells you, it tells you a story that the people that are pirating this InstallShield product are using it in a very project-based way, a single machine. And where we do see overuse, we see a much bigger opportunity because there's many machines using the software, many users using that software, even though they're not entitled to it. And so the story for InstallShield is, although Piracy gave them a view of, gave them some insight to license compliance and justification to build license compliance, they've been able to grow their program to do overuse as well. And they're seeing significant revenues. Actually, they're seeing, I think, 25% of the revenue based on license compliance. Pretty big number, even though it's a smaller product. So digging deeper, so I mentioned, or should have mentioned, we talked about piracy as service. We also talked about virtualization and the increase of not understanding where that machine is allocated to an organization, because it's on Amazon, it's on Google, it's on Azure, and there's no identifier for that. And I want to talk a little bit about how you can leverage, and some newer approaches to leverage relationships with ISPs or service providers to understand who owns those assets. And I'll get into that a little bit right now, actually. Let me talk about something that we've recently established, and this is an ISP campaign flow chart. So the opportunity here is, if you're a publisher who sees a lot of data with overuse or pirated use of your software, but not identifying, not good identifiers against what business the data is for, and that could be because the regions that it's used for. There's a lot of companies that are working behind ISPs or virtualized environments. It could also be the type of software that you have. You have a lot of single user use. This can contribute to a lot of unmatched data. Well, there's some newer approaches, and I say newer, but leveraging ISPs to try to understand who's using pirated assets came from the movie industries many years ago. They used to focus in on sending letters to end users that you're using infringed content. Hopefully, you're not one of those recipients, but it's very applicable today because there are countries that have established some legal basis for ISPs to serve up the identities of organizations that were assigned to IP addresses, and that has become a very important aspect of matching that data and getting additional license compliance opportunities. And so normally what is done there, you are segmenting your data by country where you have those relationships with the service providers. You're generating a report in terms of all the machines and events that are applicable to that. You do need a power of attorney, absolutely, in that region. That's kind of a fundamental thing. And then from depending on the legal partners, or sometimes we have accounts that do this themselves, you're actually suing that ISP via court order. But it's a normal process, and it's something that the ISP receives. And because of the particular geography where this is well enforced, they will turn around and provide feedback in terms of the inquiries. Sometimes you have to go through multiple steps to give them the right report. Now, we've developed a process where we know how to report against this. Sometimes you have to have both the IP address, which can be lots and lots of IPs, and you need the unique port information to really satisfy that ISP provider. And then you're generating leads from that data, and you're being able to act on that. And so this has become a pretty big approach when you have a lot of unmatched information from your telemetry streams.
And Vic, that's not just US, right? We're seeing that pretty successful in other regions too, like Brazil.
South Korea, yep, and it seems to be growing. We keep through the partners, we try to understand where the geographies and some of those local laws have changed to allow for this, and then from that point of view, we reach out to our customers with, hey, we think you have enough data in this particular region to really take advantage of that.
Yeah, and it does seem like some of our customers are seeing a little bit more ISP activity. Certainly during the pandemic when people were working from home. If they're not on a VPN that's going to resolve to an organization IP address, they are seeing that. So there's more opportunity here too.
Yeah, this is kind of an example of what a typical report would be, and what you're seeing here is some unique IPs, and you're seeing how they are broken up by ISP. And so we recently implemented in our own product a way that we can report that on an individual event level, so we can organize and segment the data. And that's pretty important to then build that report, have the requisite unique port number, and provide that as part of this process. No different than probably a lot of telemetry systems out there. just let me, in terms of the summary, I think overuse remains as the methodology to expand license compliance in an on-premise world, especially where you have this long tail of on-premise software. Virtualization, piracy as a service may continue to grow, but there are methods using geolocation and service provider data to really help match more and support compliance. And from an investment perspective, and I think it becomes a more sensitive topic as we grow here with all the cloud investment. What does it take to instrument products, given your R&D resources are focused in other ways? So I think telemetry probably remains that technology or that configuration that you can still easily apply to a product without without that upsetting that balance in terms of your investment. And then from a business intelligence perspective, and this has always been true, understanding your overuse, understanding the misuse going on out there helps establish how you want to move to SaaS, or potentially you may still have on-premise software, but you want to have more subscription or a consumption-based model. This could be data that could justify that investment because it would tell you where you can remove the friction that had caused compliance issues before with traditional licensing. And I think
Yep.
back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Vic. So good stuff. And just as a heads up for folks, next month we do have a webinar featuring our SVP and General Manager, Nicole Seegerer. We're going to be talking about planning for business success in 2023. Obviously, we're going to touch on compliance because I think that's an area where you can see some growth and a way to sort of reduce revenue leakage. We're talking about the importance of streamlining your quote to cash processes, but also doing things, looking at that usage data, entitlement data to, improve customer retention and things like that. So highly recommend that one if you're interested in that. And it looks like we're, Vic, just thank you again for sharing your experience and your expertise and insights today. Always good to chat with you. You've been doing this for a long time, and it's always great to get your perspective. And I want to thank everybody else for joining us today. Please be sure to check out the related materials we provided in the resource area. Let us know if you have any follow-up questions, and we look forward to seeing you again. So thanks again, and have a great day, everybody.